Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about management trends and what we can learn from how often they resurface.
We're all familiar with new management trends and the rush to follow the latest fad that claims to unlock the hidden secrets of management.
But there's nothing new about those fads. They range from the ridiculous to the idyllic, with a few cynical, toxic trends along the way. There's always somebody selling something and looking to line their pockets in the process.
But why do some trends keep coming back in different shapes and forms? What's the story?
It's interesting how some management trends seem to get recycled. It's a bit like the press and its obsession with beach bodies in the run-up to summer.
The cynics among us might suggest that obsession with dieting reflects an underlying problem of obesity or social standards.
In other words, the recurrence of a trend is a sign we still haven't found a solution to an underlying problem.
For example, the idea of a holacracy is similar to the concept of semi-autonomous teams seen 40 years earlier. It reflects the need to strike a balance between order and control on the one hand, and individual autonomy on the other.
When you look at the management trends that have surfaced in business over the past 50 years, they all have one thing in common: an attempt to expand on the limitations of the Taylorist model, which focused on job specification and very little autonomy.
But a model doesn't just adapt on its own. Either you have to change the whole process, which is time-consuming, or employees need to be given sufficient leeway to adapt it in real time to the frontline challenges they face.
The trend towards total quality management, so popular with consultants in the 90s, was inspired by Toyotism. And Toyotism itself tapped into a way of thinking that drew on the collective intelligence of operators by valuing their feedback. We've since distorted that approach in Western culture by focusing only on the goal of reducing waste.
Still, at the end of the day, everyone is trying to break down the silos that made the Taylorist model so inflexible.
Next came the learning organization, inspired by Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, in 1990. The more recent focus on collective intelligence is closely related to that approach, and the end goal is the same again: give the organization the flexibility to adapt.
Meanwhile, new developments in IT and the focus on enterprise resource planning led to real progress in promoting the productivity so dear to Taylorists. The separation of tasks and processes both encouraged a less flexible model.
Then came knowledge management in the mid-90s, the drive to capitalize on knowledge to allow the organization to continuously adapt. That was the approach advocated by Nonaka and Takeuchi, with their knowledge spiral, adding a bit more flexibility to ERP systems.
The dawn of the internet brought fresh changes, paving the way for the kind of utopian ideas seen today. Using digital solutions to cultivate cooperation, where ERP solutions offered a computerized version of Taylorism. Knowledge management fostered more flexibility.
The trend continued in the 2000s, with an acceleration in processes and more widespread use of the internet and its offshoots in companies.
So, we now find ourselves somewhere between the holacracy, with its blend of autonomy and freedom, the digital utopia of collaboration solutions enabling natural cooperation, and the traditional, less flexible Taylorist model in which power runs vertically.
The quest goes on. When an organization faces a challenge, it has 2 points of focus: be streamlined to be effective, and be able to adapt as quickly as possible. We're familiar with the organizational methods that promote the former. They draw on Taylorism and favor fairly strict models and standards.
But we also know those models don't adapt on their own, which leads us to that never-ending quest to expand them and make them more flexible without ever losing sight of their virtues.
That's something we see in the recurrent nature of management trends. They reflect a need for more breathing room when faced with a model that's efficient but inflexible.
To recap, the recurrence of some management trends reveals an underlying problem we have yet to solve: the inflexibility of the Taylorist model, which cannot in and of itself adapt to a changing environment. All new management models have more or less tried to open up Taylor's approach. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short.
Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.